"Don't move." The voice cut through the cold air like a command carved in stone, and for a second, everything around Ava Brooks seemed to stop. The hum of engines, the shuffle of feet, even the distant traffic half a mile down the road fading into a strange, suspended silence as a firm grip settled around her wrist and guided her toward the hood of her car, the metal still warm from the late afternoon sun pressing lightly against her palm. Not painful, just present, just enough to remind her that control in this moment did not belong to her, at least not yet. And across from her stood Agent Daniel Carter, posture rigid, jaw tight, eyes scanning her face not with curiosity, but with certainty, the kind that didn't ask questions because it believed it already had the answers, while a second agent moved in from her left, slower, watching, measuring, the faint crackle of a radio murmuring at his shoulder, and around them, a circle began to form, people stepping closer, some holding grocery bags, others lifting phones instinctively, drawn to tension the way people always are, unsure of what they're seeing but unable to look away, and Ava didn't pull back, didn't raise her voice, didn't even blink faster than normal, her breathing steady, controlled, the rise and fall of her chest barely noticeable beneath the loose fabric of her hoodie, the sleeves slightly worn at the edges, her sneakers dusted with the faint gray of a long shift that had ended less than 10 minutes ago. 12 hours on her feet under fluorescent lights that never quite let you forget where you stood in the world. And still, there was no panic in her posture, no rush to explain, only a quiet awareness settling in, the kind that comes from understanding a moment before it fully unfolds. Carter's grip tightened just slightly, not aggressive, but firm enough to assert authority, his voice low, deliberate. "We need you to stay right here," as if the words themselves were enough to define reality. And Ava turned her head just enough to meet his eyes, not challenging, not submissive, just steady, as if she were looking at something deeper than the badge clipped to his chest, something beneath the layers of assumption and routine. "You're making a mistake," she said, her tone even, almost calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. But there was something else there too, something grounded, something certain, and for a brief second, it flickered across Carter's face, not doubt, not yet, but the faintest hesitation, quickly buried beneath training and expectation as he glanced toward his partner, who gave a small nod, reinforcing the moment, reinforcing the belief that they were in control, that this situation was exactly what it looked like. And yet, the air around them didn't quite agree. It felt heavier now, charged in a way that didn't match the simplicity of the scene, like something unseen had just entered the space, something that didn't need to raise its voice to be felt. And Ava's fingers shifted slightly against the surface of the car, not pulling away, just adjusting, grounding, as her breathing slowed even further, deliberate, measured, the kind of rhythm that doesn't come from fear but from discipline. And somewhere in the background, a phone camera zoomed in, capturing the stillness, the imbalance, the moment before something changes, though no one there could yet say how or why. Only that the quiet woman in the worn hoodie didn't look like someone caught off guard. She looked like someone waiting for the exact second to move. Agent Carter's eyes lingered on her a fraction longer than necessary, as if something in her tone had not matched the situation he believed he was controlling. But the moment passed quickly, replaced by routine as he adjusted his stance and shifted his weight forward, reinforcing the space between them as his partner stepped closer, boots scraping lightly against the pavement, the sound small but sharp in the quiet. And somewhere behind them a car door closed with a hollow thud that echoed more than it should have, like the entire parking lot had become a chamber holding its breath. Ava Brooks remained still, her hand resting against the warm metal, her fingers no longer tense but settled, each movement deliberate, her shoulders relaxed in a way that did not match the tension around her. And it was that contrast that began to draw attention, not the situation itself, but her response to it. Because she was not reacting the way people usually did, there was no rush of words, no defensive explanation, no visible frustration, only a calm that felt out of place, almost misplaced, like it belonged somewhere else entirely, and Carter noticed it even if he did not understand it, his gaze narrowing slightly as if trying to reconcile two conflicting images, the one in front of him and the one he had already decided was true. "We have reason to believe you match a description," he said, his voice steady but louder now, projecting authority for the growing audience. A subtle shift that did not go unnoticed as more phones lifted, small glowing screens capturing every second. The reflection of Ava's still figure mirrored in each one, and she turned her head just enough to acknowledge the words, not the volume, not the pressure behind them, just the statement itself. "Then your information is wrong," she replied, her voice even, controlled, not dismissive but certain, and again that flicker crossed his expression, quicker this time, harder to ignore, because certainty was not something he expected to meet here. Not like this. Not from someone standing exactly where she was standing. And yet there it was, quiet but solid, and his partner shifted beside him, glancing at Carter for a cue, a silent question passing between them. Do we proceed or reassess? But Carter did not answer immediately, his focus still fixed on Ava as if something in her posture had anchored him there, her breathing slow, measured, each inhale deeper than the last, not forced but intentional, like someone preparing for something that had not yet happened but was already understood, and the air seemed to change with it, heavier, denser, the kind of shift that did not come from movement but from presence. And Ava's fingers lifted slightly from the hood of the car before settling again, a small adjustment, almost unnoticeable, unless you were watching closely, and someone in the crowd was, a young man holding his phone at chest level, zooming in, his screen capturing the subtle details, the stillness in her eyes, the lack of urgency. In her body, the way she seemed less like someone being held in place and more like someone choosing not to move, and that distinction, though silent, began to ripple outward, changing how the moment felt even if no one could yet explain why. And Carter inhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he took a half step back, not enough to release control, but enough to create space that had not been there before. And for the first time since the encounter began, the certainty in his stance wavered. Not visibly, not to the untrained eye, but in the smallest shift of weight, the smallest pause between thought and action, and Ava saw it, not with surprise but with recognition, like she had been waiting for that exact moment, the moment when assumption begins to loosen its grip, when control is no longer absolute but shared, even if only for a second, and her gaze remained steady, not pushing, not challenging, simply present. And in that presence there was something else now, something quiet, but unmistakable, something that did not need to be announced to be understood, because it was already there, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to be seen by anyone willing to look past what they thought they knew. The silence stretched just long enough to feel intentional, like a line drawn between what had already happened and what was about to. And Ava Brooks let her hand lift slowly from the hood of the car, not abrupt, not defiant, just controlled, her fingers uncurling with measured ease as she turned fully to face Agent Carter, her posture straightening in a way that subtly shifted the balance of the moment. No longer angled under his direction, but centered on her own, and it was a small movement, almost invisible to the crowd, yet it carried weight, the kind that came from certainty rather than force. And Carter noticed it immediately, his eyes tracking the motion, his body reacting a fraction too late, as if recalibrating in real time, his partner glancing between them, sensing the change but not yet understanding it, and the low murmur of the onlookers softened, curiosity replacing tension as phones adjusted. Zooming in closer, capturing details that were beginning to matter more than the initial confrontation, the stillness in Ava's expression, the steadiness in her gaze, the absence of fear where it had been expected, and Carter exhaled slowly, his grip loosening just enough to register, not releasing, but no longer asserting the same unquestioned authority, and Ava stepped back half a pace, creating space without asking for it, her movements precise, efficient, the kind that spoke of repetition, of training shaped over years rather than instinct formed. In a moment, and something in that precision caught Carter off guard. Not because it was aggressive, but because it was exact. Every motion placed where it needed to be, nothing wasted, nothing uncertain, and his voice came again, lower now, less performative. Ma'am, I need you to keep your hands visible. But the command lacked its earlier edge, as if it were being spoken out of protocol rather than conviction. And Ava nodded once, not submissive, not dismissive, simply acknowledging the words, before bringing one hand calmly to the front pocket of her hoodie. pausing there for a brief second, not to hesitate, but to allow the moment to catch up, her eyes never leaving his, giving him the space to object, to stop her, to reassert control if he chose to. And he did not immediately, because something in her composure held him there, suspended between action and reconsideration, and the world seemed to narrow around that single point of movement, the faint rustle of fabric, the subtle shift of weight in her stance, the quiet focus in her expression, and then she reached inside, slow, deliberate, drawing out a small, worn wallet, the edges softened from use, nothing flashy, nothing that demanded attention, and for a heartbeat it looked ordinary, completely ordinary. And that was the moment the tension sharpened again, because ordinary did not explain what he was seeing, did not match the control in her movements, did not align with the calm that had unsettled him from the start. And Ava opened the wallet with a practiced motion, her thumb pressing against the seam, flipping it just enough for the contents inside to catch the light, a glint of metal, a card aligned perfectly behind it, and she held it at chest level, not thrust forward, not hidden, simply presented, and the angle was precise, positioned so only he could see clearly at first, drawing his attention inward, away from the crowd, away from the noise, narrowing his focus to a single detail, and his eyes dropped to it almost instinctively, scanning, processing, and then stopping, because what he saw did not fit the narrative he had built, did not belong in this moment the way he understood it. And the certainty in his expression cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a quiet, undeniable shift, the kind that changes everything without needing to say a word. And his partner leaned slightly closer, trying to read the situation from Carter's reaction alone, sensing the change before seeing the cause. And Ava did not move, did not press the moment. She simply held her ground, her breathing steady, her posture unchanged, allowing the realization to unfold on its own, because she knew it would, because moments like this always did when truth met assumption face to face. And for the first time since the encounter began, the control in the space did not feel one-sided anymore. It felt balanced, suspended between two people standing inches apart, one realizing he might have been wrong, and the other knowing she never was. Carter's gaze locked onto the open wallet as if the world around him had narrowed to a single point, the faint glint of metal catching the late afternoon light and reflecting it back into his eyes, sharper than expected, clearer than it should have been in a moment like this. And for a second he did not move, did not speak, his posture held in place by something deeper than hesitation, something closer to realization. And the air between them shifted again, quieter now, heavier, as if the weight of what he was seeing had not fully settled yet. His partner leaned in just slightly, trying to follow his line of sight, but Carter lifted a hand without looking, a subtle motion, not forceful, just enough to signal pause, to hold the moment where it was, contained, controlled, and Ava Brooks did not lower the wallet, did not press it closer, she simply held it there, steady, allowing him the time to process, her breathing even, her shoulders relaxed, the calm in her presence no longer out of place but starting to make sense, starting to align with what he was seeing instead of contradicting it. And Carter swallowed once, his throat tightening slightly as his eyes moved across the details, the insignia, the identification, the alignment of everything he thought he knew with something he clearly did not. And it was not dramatic, not sudden, just a quiet unraveling of certainty, the kind that happens when assumption meets fact without warning. And behind him the faint murmur of the crowd softened, people sensing the shift even if they could not see it, phones still raised but movements slower now, curiosity replacing tension, and Carter finally stepped back half a pace, the distance small but significant, creating space where there had been none, his grip no longer present, his authority no longer pressing forward the same way it had just moments ago, and his partner's eyes flickered between them, confusion settling in, waiting for instruction that did not come, because Carter was no longer reacting from routine, he was recalculating, and that took time, more time than this moment seemed to allow. And Ava closed the wallet with a soft, controlled motion, the sound barely audible, but clear enough to mark a transition, not an end, just a shift. And she lowered her hand calmly to her side, not hiding it, not displaying it, simply returning to stillness as if the movement had never been about proving anything. only about clarifying what already was, and Carter's shoulders eased slightly, the tension in his stance no longer rigid but uncertain, his voice, when it came quieter, less projected. "Ma'am," he began, but the word did not carry the same authority it had before. It sounded different now, searching rather than commanding, and Ava met his eyes again, the same steady gaze, unchanged, not holding on to the moment, not pressing it forward, just present, allowing him to find his footing without interference, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was full, filled with everything that had just shifted, everything that could no longer be ignored, and somewhere in that quiet, the balance had fully turned, not with force, not with confrontation, but with clarity, the kind that does not raise its voice but changes everything anyway. And Carter exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the open air, but it marked something important, the moment he understood that this was no longer the situation he thought it was. And Ava did not move, because she had known that moment would come. She had been waiting for it from the very beginning. The word lingered unfinished between them as Carter lowered his hand completely, the last trace of command dissolving into something quieter, something uncertain, and for the first time since the encounter began, he did not step forward to fill the silence. He let it exist, let it stretch, as if he understood that anything he said too quickly might make the moment worse instead of better. And Ava Brooks remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her gaze steady, not pressing him, not retreating, simply present in a way that made it impossible to ignore what had just shifted. And the parking lot no longer felt like a stage of confrontation, but something else entirely, something reflective, where every movement carried more weight than before. And Carter glanced briefly at his partner, a silent exchange passing between them, not of instruction but of realization, because the situation they thought they were handling had already moved beyond them, and his partner took a small step back without being told, the motion subtle but meaningful, creating space that had not existed minutes ago, and behind them the crowd adjusted again, phones lowering slightly, the urgency fading into a quieter kind of attention, as if people were no longer waiting for conflict but for understanding. And Carter finally spoke, his voice lower now, stripped of projection. "I need to verify this," he said, not as a command but as a process, something he needed to do not to assert control, but to regain clarity. And Ava gave a single, calm nod, the gesture small but sufficient, granting him that space without resistance, without challenge, because she understood the necessity of it, understood that this moment was no longer about proving anything, but about allowing truth to settle where assumption once stood. And Carter reached for his radio, the movement slower than before, more deliberate, his fingers pausing for a fraction of a second before pressing the button, as if even that action required recalibration, his voice quiet as he spoke into it, requesting confirmation, codes, identifiers, words that meant little to the crowd but everything to him. And the response crackled back after a few seconds that felt longer than they were, the static filling the silence like a low hum beneath the surface. And as he listened, something in his expression shifted again, not sharply, not dramatically, but enough to be seen, enough to confirm what he had already begun to understand, his shoulders easing, his stance no longer guarded but grounded. And when he lowered the radio, the tension that had defined him at the start was gone, replaced by something more human, something more aware. And he met Ava's eyes again, this time without the filter of assumption, without the distance of authority, just direct, clear, and present. "There has been a misunderstanding," he said, the words simple, almost understated for what they carried. And Ava did not react immediately. She did not nod, did not speak. She simply held his gaze for a moment longer, allowing the weight of that admission to settle fully, not for herself, but for him. For the moment, for everything it represented. And then she exhaled softly, the breath slow and controlled, not relief, not tension, just completion, as if a cycle had reached its natural end. And she shifted her weight slightly, preparing to step away, not abruptly, not dismissively, just naturally, like someone who had never intended to stay longer than necessary. And Carter watched that movement with a different kind of attention now, not to control it, but to understand it. And for a brief second, something unspoken passed between them, not forgiveness, not apology, but recognition, the kind that does not need words because it exists in the space where both people see the same truth at the same time. And as Ava took her first step back, the air seemed to lighten, the moment loosening its grip on everything around it, leaving behind something quieter, something that would not be forgotten even after the crowd dispersed and the parking lot returned to its ordinary rhythm. Because what had shifted here was not just a situation, it was perspective, and that kind of change does not fade easily. The space between them widened as Ava Brooks took another step back, not rushed, not hesitant, just measured, her movements carrying the same quiet precision that had defined every second since the moment began, and the tension that once filled the parking lot did not snap or disappear. It softened, like air releasing slowly from something that had been held too tight. And Agent Carter stood still, his hands no longer positioned for control but resting at his sides, his posture no longer rigid, but grounded, as if he were standing in a place he had not expected to be, a place where certainty had been replaced with awareness. And for a brief moment, neither of them spoke, the silence settling naturally, not forced, not awkward, just present. And it was in that silence that everything seemed clearer, the distant sound of traffic returning, the low murmur of voices from the crowd, the faint rustle of wind moving across the asphalt, brushing lightly against clothing and carrying with it the subtle shift in atmosphere that everyone could feel but no one could fully describe. And Ava turned slightly toward her car, her hand reaching for the door handle, pausing there for a fraction of a second, as if acknowledging the moment one last time, not out of hesitation but out of awareness, because she understood what had just happened, not just on the surface but beneath it, the shift in perception, the quiet correction of something that had not been questioned before. And Carter watched that small pause, his expression no longer guarded but reflective, as if he were replaying the last few minutes in his mind, seeing them differently now, understanding details he had overlooked. And his partner remained a step behind, silent, observing, no longer looking for direction but absorbing the change just as much as he was. And in the distance, one by one, the phones began to lower, the audience slowly disengaging, not because the moment had ended, but because it had resolved in a way they did not expect, without escalation, without spectacle, just clarity. And that kind of ending did not demand noise, it invited quiet. And Ava opened the car door with a soft, controlled motion, the hinge releasing a low, familiar sound that cut gently through the remaining silence. And as she did, Carter finally spoke again, his voice steady but different now, stripped of assumption. "Ma'am," he said, the word no longer carrying authority but respect. And she paused, turning her head just enough to acknowledge him, her expression unchanged, calm, present. And he held that moment carefully, choosing his words with more attention than before. "You were right," he said, simple, direct, no justification, no attempt to reframe what had happened, just acknowledgement. And Ava looked at him for a second longer, her eyes steady, not searching, not judging, just receiving the statement for what it was. And she gave a slight nod, not as acceptance or dismissal, but as recognition, because that was all the moment required. And then she turned back, stepping into the car, her movements as composed as they had been from the start. And as the door closed with a quiet, final sound, something settled across the space, not tension, not relief, but a quiet understanding. And Carter remained where he stood, watching the car for a moment longer, his reflection faintly visible in the window as it caught the fading light. And for the first time that day, he did not look like someone in control of a situation. He looked like someone who had learned from it. And as the engine started and the car began to move, slow and steady out of the parking lot, the moment did not follow her. It stayed behind, lingering in the air, in the silence, in the space between what had been assumed and what had been revealed. And long after the car disappeared into the distance, that space remained, quiet, undeniable, and changed. The sound of the engine faded into the distance until it blended with the steady rhythm of the city beyond the parking lot, leaving behind a space that felt strangely quieter than before, not empty but settled, as if the moment itself had chosen to stay even after Ava Brooks was gone. And Agent Carter remained where he stood, his gaze lingering on the space her car had just occupied, his posture still, not frozen but reflective, the weight of what had just happened settling deeper with each passing second. and around him the crowd began to disperse in small, uneven movements, conversations starting in low tones, phones slipping back into pockets, the energy shifting from tension to contemplation, because what they had witnessed did not resolve with noise or spectacle. It resolved with something quieter, something harder to explain, and Carter exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly, as if releasing something he had not realized he was holding. And his partner stepped closer now, no longer cautious but curious, his voice low. "You did not see that coming, did you?" And Carter did not answer right away, his eyes still fixed ahead, his thoughts moving through the moment piece by piece, replaying the details, the tone of her voice, the steadiness in her gaze, the way she had not needed to raise it, not once. And he shook his head faintly, more to himself than to his partner. "No," he said finally, the word quiet but clear, carrying more weight than it seemed. And he glanced down briefly at his own hands, as if measuring them against the memory of how they had been positioned just minutes ago, firm, certain, unquestioning. And now they felt different, not weaker, not uncertain, just aware of something they had missed, something they had assumed instead of understanding. And he shifted his stance, turning slightly toward his partner, who was watching him closely now, waiting, not for instruction but for meaning. And Carter's expression softened in a way that was almost imperceptible, his voice steady but introspective. "We moved too fast," he said, not as an excuse, not as a defense, just a statement. And his partner nodded once, slowly, absorbing the words, letting them settle, because they both knew it was more than just speed. It was something deeper, something built into the way they approached moments like this, something that had gone unchallenged until now. And a faint breeze moved through the lot, carrying the scent of warm asphalt and distant traffic, brushing lightly against their uniforms, grounding the moment back into something ordinary. And Carter glanced once more toward the road where Ava had disappeared, not expecting to see her, not needing to, but acknowledging the absence all the same. And for a brief second, the image of her standing there returned to him, calm, composed, unshaken. And he understood now that it was not just who she was that changed the moment. It was how she chose to stand in it, how she held her ground without force, how she allowed the truth to reveal itself instead of pushing it forward. And that realization stayed with him, settling into a place deeper than routine, deeper than protocol. Because it was not something that could be written into procedure, it had to be carried, remembered, applied. And he turned away slowly, the parking lot returning to its normal rhythm around him, cars moving, people walking, the world continuing as it always did. But something within him had shifted, not dramatically, not in a way anyone else could see, but enough to matter, enough to change the way the next moment would be handled. And as he walked toward his vehicle, the quiet of what had just happened followed him, not loudly, not persistently, just enough to remind him that sometimes the most important lessons do not come from force or correction. They come from being shown, clearly and calmly, exactly where you were wrong, and having the awareness to see it. The parking lot had almost returned to its normal rhythm by the time Carter reached his vehicle, but something in the air still lingered, a quiet residue of the moment that refused to fully disappear. And he paused with his hand on the door handle, not opening it right away, his reflection faintly visible in the darkened window, slightly distorted by the angle of the glass. And for a second, he just stood there, looking at himself not as an agent, not as authority, but as a man who had just been shown something he could not ignore. And behind him his partner approached more slowly this time, footsteps softer, less urgent, the tension that had once driven their movements replaced with something more measured, more aware. And he stopped a few feet away, not interrupting, not pushing, simply present. And Carter let out a slow breath, the kind that comes when a realization settles deeper than expected. And he finally opened the door halfway before stopping again, his hand resting on the edge, his gaze dropping briefly as if replaying the scene one more time. Not the beginning, not the confrontation, but the moment it shifted, the moment her voice stayed calm while his did not, the moment her posture remained steady while his adjusted, the moment he realized control did not come from volume or position, but from something quieter, something he had overlooked. And he closed the door again without getting in, the soft click echoing lightly in the space around him. And he turned back toward his partner, his expression no longer guarded but thoughtful. "I handled that wrong," he said, not loud, not defensive, just clear, and his partner nodded once, not surprised, not disagreeing, just acknowledging what had already become obvious. And for a moment they stood there without speaking, the weight of the statement settling between them, not heavy but meaningful, and Carter looked out toward the road again, where the last trace of her presence had disappeared minutes ago. And he shook his head slightly, more in recognition than disbelief. "She did not raise her voice once," he added, almost to himself, and his partner glanced at him, considering that, letting it sink in, because it was true, and it mattered, more than either of them had expected, and a faint breeze moved through the lot again, lifting the edge of Carter's sleeve, grounding the moment in something real, something present. And he finally stepped back from the vehicle, no longer in a hurry to leave, his posture shifting once more, not into authority but into reflection, and he spoke again, slower now, choosing his words carefully. "Next time." We slowed down, and his partner gave a small nod, understanding that it was not just a suggestion. It was a change, a quiet correction to something that had gone unquestioned for too long. And Carter's gaze lingered one last time on the empty stretch of asphalt before turning away. The lesson still fresh, still clear, and as they both moved toward their vehicles, the world around them continued as it always did. Cars passing, voices rising and fading, the ordinary rhythm of life resuming. But beneath that surface, something had shifted, not loudly, not visibly, but enough to matter, enough to carry forward. Because moments like that did not end when the scene was over. They stayed, shaping the next decision, the next interaction, the next time assumption tried to take the lead. And as Carter finally got into his vehicle and closed the door, the quiet inside felt different than before, not empty, not tense, just still, as if giving him space to think, to process, to understand. And he sat there for a moment before starting the engine, his hands resting lightly on the steering wheel. Not gripping, not rushing, just steady, as the last pieces of the moment settled into place. The engine turned over with a low, steady hum, filling the quiet space inside the vehicle as Carter rested his hands lightly on the wheel, not gripping, not tense, just present. And for a moment he did not pull away, he simply sat there, the reflection of the fading sky stretching across the windshield, soft shades of amber and gray blending into something calm. Something still, and outside, the parking lot continued to move. Cars backing out, people walking, the rhythm of ordinary life. Returning fully now as if nothing had happened. Yet he knew that was not entirely true, because something had changed, not in the world around him, but in the way he would see it from this point forward. And he exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting for a second to the empty stretch of asphalt where the moment had unfolded, now indistinguishable from any other space, no mark left behind, no sign that anything had shifted except in memory. And that was enough, more than enough, because it was clear, undeniable, and quiet in a way that stayed with you. And he adjusted his posture slightly, sitting back, letting his shoulders settle into the seat as the weight of the realization no longer felt heavy but grounded, something to carry, not something to resist. And in that stillness, a single thought moved through his mind, not loud, not forced, just steady, the understanding that authority without awareness was incomplete, that certainty without pause could lead you somewhere you never intended to go, and that sometimes the strongest presence in a moment was not the one that controlled it, but the one that understood it. And Ava Brooks had shown that without raising her voice, without demanding attention, without stepping outside of herself. And that was what stayed, not the confrontation, not the correction, but the way she held her ground with nothing but clarity and composure. And Carter turned the wheel slightly, guiding the vehicle forward at a slow, controlled pace, the tires rolling over the pavement with a soft, familiar sound. And as he moved toward the exit, the light ahead shifted, opening onto the road beyond, a steady stream of cars passing, headlights beginning to glow as the day slipped further into evening. And he paused briefly at the edge before merging, not out of hesitation but out of awareness, looking, taking in the space, allowing the moment to complete itself fully. And then he pulled out, smooth and measured, blending into the flow without urgency, without force, just moving forward. And as the Parking lot faded behind him. There was no need to look back, because what had happened there was already with him, carried in the way he held the wheel, in the way he watched the road, in the space between reaction and response that now felt wider, more intentional, and the city stretched out ahead, familiar but slightly different now, not because it had changed, but because he had, even if only in a small, quiet way, the kind that does not announce itself, does not demand recognition, but shows up the next time a moment like that begins, the next time a voice speaks before understanding, the next time assumption tries to take the lead, and in that future moment, he would remember, not as a lesson spoken, but as a moment lived, clear, calm, and impossible to ignore, and the road carried him forward under the dimming sky, steady and silent, as everything settled into place.